All right, Chief Meteorologist Jeff Day, thank you very much for that weather update. All right, again, today we have seen 10, I believe, potential jurors so far just on day 2. 14 in all have been questioned by attorneys. We're going to bring in News 13 legal analyst Mark NeJame, who's been standing by and keeping a close eye. And this last juror, potential juror, Mark, was pretty interesting considering what he knows about this case early on, about the controversy surrounding Sanford Police Department, and then later on there being an arrest. What do you think about his chances, and what do you think about him being on this jury?
Not great, but you never know. It's interesting that the first 40 that were tossed, many of them would have arguably known about the same information that he did, but they apparently had indicated that they had a bias or an opinion that would not allow them to be fair and impartial. Just because somebody follows the news and reads the stories and is aware of what's going on doesn't mean that they're automatically going to be tossed. In fact, to be educated is not a bad thing. It's just that they're indicating that they haven't formulated an opinion until all the evidence is in, and we know that all the evidence won't be in until there's in fact a trial. So it's really hard to say, but he did seem to indicate, you know, going in a certain direction, so that might be enough to have him out. But, you know, he's knowledgeable and he's intelligent. I think some of the things that have come out there are very interesting throughout the course of the day. Something we haven't talked about much, but we'll get into it more as this jury is getting closer to being gelled and formed, is that there's what's called a Batson challenge. Batson versus Indiana was a case from 25 years ago, where basically the Supreme Court said for peremptory strikes you can basically have any reason you want, which has been the established law, except when it comes to race. Your strikes have to be race neutral. If in fact you strike a juror, and this initially was a prosecutor who was seeking to exclude all African Americans from a jury, then you can not just strike somebody because they happen to be African American. And there's been different cases and a progeny of cases that have come out and now indicate there's some that say that the defense can't do it as well. So essentially, nobody can just strike a juror because of their race. And we know that race is in fact an issue in this case. It's what some have alleged why he wasn't arrested in the first place, and it's why some are indicating that now that Trayvon Martin has had so much attention drawn to the case because of the racial issues that have gone through this case from the start. So it's going to be very interesting that when you are listening to some of these jurors who are African American, that if there's any challenges to exclude them, then you're going to hear an objection from the other side in raising what's called a Batson challenge. And that would be saying that give good reasons that are independent of the race. So I'm anxious to see how that develops over time, but it's going to be something that you're going to be seeing and we're going to be hearing about over the next few days.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Mark, because everyone wants to know what will be the racial makeup of this potential jury. I can tell you right now, at least for today, there has been 3 non-whites that have been questioned today, 2 that were African American. And so everyone wants to know, somehow want to relate whether or not George Zimmerman can get a fair trial based on the racial makeup of that jury. And you know, you have to think independently of that. As you said, Mark, you just can't have a decision based solely there on race. It'll be interesting to see how they try to, because, Mark, wouldn't you agree they're going to try to possibly work around that?
Well, you've got to be very careful. It's simply the law. You cannot exclude somebody merely because of their color, period. Now, with that, if there's in fact a challenge from the defense, and that's presumably where it's going to be coming from, you're going to hear the state say, Your Honor, we want a Batson challenge on this. And that is, they're going to want to hear reasons, independent of the race, why that particular juror should be excluded. And it's up to the judge to make a determination as to whether the Batson challenge will be supported or whether there's independent reasons that, in this particular case, Judge Nelson would deem to be appropriate. And when you get into the racial composition, I think we all know that it exists, but there's been a lot of hesitancy to talk about it. But I think that we can't fully give the story that needs to be told unless we do talk about it. Sanford is 30% African American and is 18.5% unemployed. That's a that's in stark contrast to the rest of Seminole County, a very affluent county, predominantly white, only between 10 and 11% African American in the entire county of Seminole. And that includes bringing in Sanford as part of Seminole County. So when you exclude Sanford from the equation, you have a much different group than you would have generally when you're dealing with Seminole County. And this jury pool does not come out of just Sanford. It comes out of the entire county of Seminole County. So when you look at the composition, you're only talking about 10%. So out of 100 people, only 10%, if it follows the percentage that exists in the county just normally, is going to be 10 African Americans out of a group of 100. And the other issue we've got is that when people typically talk of minorities, it's typically African American and Hispanic. Well, here you have George Zimmerman, Hispanic. So would that be even helpful to have a Hispanic, from the views of the prosecutor and the defense, to have a Hispanic juror? And would that be deemed to be a minority, because it might be that the state doesn't want a Hispanic juror on there? And then the issue then, would the Batson standard be applicable to the state if they wanted to exclude somebody who might be of Hispanic heritage? So some very complex legal issues, some very complex social issues, but I think we're not doing the story justice if we don't talk about it, and we're not aware of what some of the true issues are, social and political, as well as legal, of course.
Absolutely. We've heard that in the questioning as well, so I'm sure it'll come up again. All right, Mark NeJame, stand by, our News 13 legal analyst. They are still in sidebar in the George Zimmerman trial. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Speaking of social media, just so you know, I just was checking the Twitter feed for Natalie Jackson. She is the attorney for the Martin family. Her thoughts about how long jury selection will take, she's thinking about 2 weeks or so. So let's bring in our News 13 legal analyst, Mark NeJame, for his thoughts about what he thinks so far about the jury selection. What would you think about today, and how long do you think it's going to take for jury selection?
I would agree with Natalie. I think we're heading in that direction. If we got the number we've got right now, remember, we'll probably get to 21 tomorrow, probably. And if we do, that still doesn't mean we're anywhere close to picking a jury, because you have to have, you've got 10 strikes on both sides, and you still have a whole bunch of cause challenges that likely will be occurring once they get into some deeper questioning, if that's the direction they go. So it's moving pretty well, but I think that this is why we've estimated, 1 to 3 weeks for jury selection, and it's probably going to fall right in the middle ground there. I think Natalie's assessment is probably pretty accurate.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. You never know what's in an attorney's mind about what they're thinking when they're trying to pick who's going to be on this jury. So far, do you think, not that we're saying we could get to 6, but could you at least pick a couple that we've heard so far that you think could make good jurors for both sides? We really are at a disadvantage by not being able to watch them. And it really does make a difference. You can pick up a lot from mannerisms and reading people and looking at them when they're fidgeting or looking you directly in the eyes. When you're looking at whether they're a leader or a follower as far as their place in the jury, you always, on your side, you always want to look for somebody that you think is not only siding with you, but has a great likelihood of being elected the jury foreperson, because they're the person who's going to likely bring the rest of the jury behind them. And those are all things that you somewhat miss by not being able to. You can hear them, but you can't see them, and there is something to be said for that. So from just listening to them, it seems like a pretty good group. I'll tell you, they're better than I would have expected. They're seemingly pretty articulate, intelligent. They've been honest from what we can tell, but again, that's what you don't know. Being careful of that stealth juror, the one that wants to be there for the fame or the book or the publicity later on. It's rather hard just listening to them without seeing them as well. But right now, I think we're getting a pretty fair representation. Some people are really completely ignorant of what's been going on. Some are rather well educated, and there's many who fall right in the middle. Probably that's not unlike much of the general population. And remember, those who have formed strong opinions have been bounced already. 40% got taken out on the first swipe, 40 out of the 100. So we're down to, there was 60, one more got removed. So we're getting there, and I think we're going to get there pretty soon. The question's been asked often, are we going to be able to get a fair and impartial jury? Well, I think that the listeners can determine and the viewers can determine that so far from what we've heard, we're heading in that direction, and I'm very optimistic about that. All right, thank you very much, News 13's Mark NeJame, our News 13 legal analyst.